Our rabbit hole began with the week 4 material focused on industrial work in Bristol. Having noticed the lack of female representation in the dock worker interviews, we decided to conduct research into the types of work carried out by women during the industrial period in Bristol. We came up with a set time period for our rabbit hole based on the early 20th century, since the 1920s were the period in which the dock workers referred to in their interviews. We found this out through the mention of the wreck of the SS Exeter, which happened in 1924. At this point, the key questions we were asking ourselves were, what were women doing during this time? What role did women have within society? What kinds of work did women do, and where were they employed? We decided to follow our line of inquiry by looking at the places where women may have been employed in the city. We specifically focused on areas around the floating harbour, since the harbour appeared to be of importance for industrial work during the 20th century. Using the interactive map on the Bristol Floating Harbour website, we were able to focus on the key areas of interest such as Cannons Marsh. We chose to investigate the Floating Harbour website, as this seemed like a natural progression since it was the original source of the dock worker interviews. In order to gain more information about the Cannons Marsh area, we started to use the Know Your Place website. This allowed us to choose a map as a base layer which corresponded with the time period that we were interested in. We were able to locate the Reed Hall Dispensary and Cannons Marsh Gasworks as key sites of employment in the early 20th century using the 1898 to 1939 map.
Reed Hall can be considered quite an important place for women workers, as it was the first piece of evidence we found that contained any information that was specifically about women's employment around the docks. We found that the Reed Hall Dispensary was the first of its kind outside of London, as it was set up by a woman specifically for female doctors to train and work as medical staff, treating female patients during the early 20th century. However, from looking at the Know Your Place map and the interactive history map, following the same line of inquiry, we didn't stop at Reed Hall, but instead decided to look around the area of the Reed Hall Dispensary to try and find more information or clues about any female involvement in industrial works. We discovered that it was in very close proximity to Cannons Marsh Gasworks, the first gasworks in Bristol. From this point onwards, we decided that the journey of our rabbit hole would follow further investigation into the Cannons Gasworks rather than Reed Hall Dispensary. This was because we were trying to narrow down our focus and stick to women's involvement, specifically in industrial work around the docks. As a result of our research and findings, a slight change of direction moved us away from other female employment sectors to focus more specifically on the Cannon Gasworks, as we found that during this time period of the earlier 20th century, gasworks were central to industrial work in Bristol.
As our interest in following Cannons Marsh Gasworks and female industrial work developed further down our rabbit hole, we discovered the factual and numerical involvement of women in the gasworks. A Google search asking whether women were employed in the gasworks in Bristol in the 1920s resulted in finding the archived source, the Bristol Gas Industry, 1815 to 1949. We found that between 30 and 40 women were employed as stokers by the British Gas Company during World War I, reaffirmed by the Western Daily Press, who stated others were also engaged in wheeling coal, as gas was such an important resource during this time for explosives during the war. Despite efforts to dig further into female involvement in Cannons Marsh Gasworks, apart from the British Gas Industry 1815 to 1949 and the generic involvement of women in these gasworks, limited information was available. We asked ourselves questions as to why this was the case and wondered if it could be illustrative of anything meaningful or significant. However, instead of ending our rabbit hole here, we wanted to hone further in on female involvement in the gasworks by looking at if there are any examples of female individuals and their personal experiences within Cannons Marsh Gasworks.
We tried to follow up these leads by searching for academic and historic articles, but could not find any further sources dedicated to our research area. Dr. Lily Baker was the only named individual we were able to identify. Her name appears in both the Gasworks pamphlet and the 1922-23 Bristol Medico-Surgical Society journal. She was a doctor employed by the gasworks to perform medical exams and oversee the health of female employees. In this way, she embodies the interconnectedness between these two very different industries. However, the case of Lily Baker is quite unique, and we wish to look specifically at women taking part in more industrial kinds of labour, the kinds of women Dr. Baker was responsible for. Overall, we found there were significant gaps in the information available on the kinds of work women were undertaking during the 1920s within Bristol. This is to be expected, as information would have been lost over time and the daily lives of working class women were not considered to be of great consequence or interest to either commentators at the time or social historians in the present. In order to overcome these issues, we would attempt to track down relatives of women working in Bristol at the time. This could be achieved by accessing local parish records of births, deaths, and marriages, and searching them for information on women's occupations, then trying to follow any relevant names through to the present day. We would then conduct interviews with them to collect primary data and gain further personal information, perhaps gaining access to diaries and letters, which would give us a more nuanced and personal understanding of the role women were playing in Bristol's industrial economy.
To summarise, therefore, we've used a wide variety of sources stemming from the original dock worker interview transcripts, enabling us to explore the rabbit hole of women in industrial work in Bristol. These sources range from historical archives to social media, and specifically Facebook, highlighting the breadth of research we undertook. While social media is of course limited in its reliability as a source, it can be key situated knowledge, allowing a different kind of insight into a theme. In addition, the fact that our rabbit hole was sparked by the lack of female presence in the dock worker interviews emphasises the importance of the more implicitly stated assertions, or even those which are not mentioned at all. Our rabbit hole reflects this, and shows how asking questions of what isn't mentioned can be just as crucial as that which is explicitly stated, and can lead to an investigation of its own, establishing a greater sense of place for Bristol. Through the research and a process of refinement, as we followed the rabbit hole, we were able to narrow down our final question. How did the role of women in industrial work in Bristol, with a specific focus on the gasworks, impact wider society? Although our rabbit hole primarily focused on the role of women in the gasworks, it is clear that there are many different industrial sectors in which women were employed in Bristol. Therefore, as mentioned earlier, there are further avenues where our research could go, potentially leading to other rabbit holes, and therefore, through the use of primary data, we could explore even more regarding the role of women in Bristol's industrial past.